Hello everyone, sorry for the delay. There were more corrections I wanted to make for this video than in the previous one. In addition, there are so many more bosses in Dark Souls 2 than there are in Dark Souls 1. It also makes sense that I would have more corrections about Dark Souls 2 because I haven't played the game nearly as many times. Anyway, what is this video about? Elden Ring Nightreign has brought back 6 bosses from the Dark Souls games, those being Gaping Dragon and Centipede Demon from Dark Souls 1, Smelter Demon and Duke's Dear Freya from Dark Souls 2, and the Dancer of the Boreal Valley and the Nameless King from Dark Souls 3. At the time of making these videos, the DLC for the game has officially been announced, but very few details were known, so I theorized that other Dark Souls bosses might be brought back with the expansion. And luckily, I seem to have been correct, as after the Dark Souls 2 series concluded, during the production of the Supercut, the DLC received a trailer and a release date. On December 4th, 2025, the Forsaken Hollows DLC will release. In the trailer, they teased exactly one returning boss, and luckily, it is from Dark Souls 1, Knight Artorias. I had given him an A rank, which means that my opinion is correct. Just kidding. I just happened to guess correctly that one of the best bosses in the game would still be good if brought to another game. Anyway, you know what tier lists are, you know what tiers represent. I know I had specific criteria in my Dark Souls 1 video, but I was a lot more loose with my rulings here. That's all you need to know before I get started. Last Giant is one of the first bosses players can fight in Dark Souls 2. As such, it is one of the easiest bosses to beat. When we enter the room, the boss appears to recognize us and gets irrationally angry, clearly attacking us with all the rage he can muster, despite being chained, imprisoned, and left to die for who knows how long. It attacks with foot stomps and arm swipes, and when it reaches half health, it rips off its left arm using its right arm and swings its now severed limb at us as part of its attacks. Despite this really metal phase change, it's still mostly the same fight, and the Last Giant goes down easily. It's not a hard fight, but it really makes one question why the boss is so angry at us in the first place. Luckily, we find out later in the game when we gain the ability to enter Dead Giant's memories. In one of them, we are transported into the middle of an ongoing battlefield, and at the end is the Giant Lord. He attacks with ground stomps again, but unlike the Last Giant, he has a sword with which to pound and strike us with. His moveset is still fairly limited, but he hits much harder and has a lot more health. In addition, our ability to enter Giant's memories comes with a time limit before we're kicked out, so we must defeat the Giant Lord before the timer runs out. It's not a difficult fight, but it's not a cakewalk like the Last Giant's is. It is through this fight that we learn that the reason the Last Giant was so irrationally angry at us was that we were the ones who defeated him in the past, likely causing his imprisonment and therefore rage. It's a neat mystery that gets resolved quite cleanly, in my opinion. Unfortunately, this would not be able to be conveyed in Nightreign. Out of the two, the Giant Lord fight probably works better as it is everything the Last Giant fight is, but with added difficulty. In addition, his sword has a surprising amount of reach and could surprise range characters. My main problem is that the only lock-on targets are on his legs, and this goes for both fights. This means that most players spend the entire fight staring at the Giant Lord and the Last Giant's feet, which, if you're into that sort of thing, I won't judge, but it doesn't make for an engaging boss fight. If he were to be added in Nightreign, adding a lock-on point somewhere in his chest or head would help immensely, even if only for ranged characters. He would also need to attack slightly faster, and they could clean up some of the hitboxes. The stomp ones are particularly atrocious. The Giant Lord would probably work best as a field boss or the boss of an enemy camp. He would thematically and visually fit in as the castle top boss, but it wouldn't work difficulty-wise. The Last Giant gets a D tier on the tier list of what Dark Souls 2 bosses should return to Nightreign. He serves mostly as a semi-tutorial boss for the game, making him way too easy, but he is also a setup for the real fight, the Giant Lord. If From Software were to put him in the game, they shouldn't and should just put the Giant Lord instead, which I'll give a B tier for. He's much more viable than the Last Giant, but needs some tweaking to the hitboxes, speed, and lock-on positions. He is capable of attacking at a surprising range, but would still be easy. He would work with these changes, but I personally think most fans would prefer other bosses over the Giant Lord and the Last Giant. I loved the Pursuer, not because of the fight itself, but because of how the Pursuer exists in the plot of Dark Souls 2. You first meet him on a ruined battlefield where he arrives on a bird, but he's not a boss. If you fail to defeat him there, you can challenge him again later, and he's a real boss. Not only that, but several times throughout the story he'll appear again and you'll have to fight him. He feels like a real rival to the bearer of the undead curse. He's someone I love to hate. Whenever he shows up, I'm always like, you again? Fine, time to show you who is boss. I think seeing him multiple times really adds to him persisting in my memory as one of the best characters in Dark Souls 2, rising above other dozens of bosses. Battle-wise, he's a floating knight character with fairly simple moves. In the boss fight itself, he's limited to his phase 1 moveset, which consists of a sword swipe and shield bash combo, a thrusting grab that reduces your max health, and a dash attack for closing distances. When he appears later in the game, he can get access to a phase 2 where he gets some dark projectiles and an explosion attack. It's all very standard and surprisingly solid, with the only common problem being that the grab has a hitbox that lasts a little bit too long. I think that if they were to port the Pursuer as a generic boss, it would work, but it also would be a supreme letdown. In my opinion, he would be so good as an invader. He wouldn't be super tough, but given that besides his boss fight, he usually appears in places with other enemies, he should do the same. So here's what I'm envisioning. Every enemy camp has a tiny chance of having the Pursuer invade you while doing its boss fight. You can run away and get no reward, he won't chase you around. However, if you stay and defeat him, you get some runes, and if you manage to do that without dying, he appears again during that night's boss fight when they get down to half health. Defeat him then, and he'll drop a reward akin to Dark Souls 2's, a talisman which you can choose from 3 options. One will always be a relevant talisman for the character, like the jump attack talisman for Raider or the guard counter talisman for Guardian. The second option is the talisman that targets the Night Lord's weakness, such as the Lightning Scorpion charm for Fulgor, the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation for fighting Adele, and so on. The last option is the Ritual Sword Talisman for the non-casters or another spell boosting talisman for the casters. Do this and I think the Pursuer will have been implemented in a way that is faithful to how he is in his original game, but also adapted perfectly to Nightraign's format. It would also add a little bit of planning. If the players have good talismans already or don't think they can handle the Pursuer in that night's fight, they can just ignore the initial enemy camp encounter, but the Pursuer's guaranteed helpful rewards would incentivize them to defeat him, unlike Libra's invasion rewards. Anyway, when it comes to ranking, I have been torn. I really want to give him the S tier, because if implemented how I would like him to be implemented, he would honestly be an S tier invader, way better than the other ones. However, the way I've established my ranking system is that the S tier bosses are ones that can basically be ported over to Nightreign with minimal changes, meaning that the Pursuer should get the A tier, since he needs some tweaking. I think I'm just going to go against my better judgment and give him... the S tier. I just can't let go of the idea that adding the Pursuer as an invader in an expedition would be the perfect way to implement him. He'd be a rare enough encounter to not really pose a problem for most people. I know this goes against my established ranking justifications, but I just really want him in the game how I detailed him. Sorry. This is just Ornstein from the previous game. They did give him some extra dark attacks, suggesting that it's not the Ornstein, but instead someone cosplaying as him, but it's still a smoothless Ornstein with some super Ornstein attacks. D tier. It would be neat if they brought back ONS and gave O some of this guy's dark attacks, but I'd rather just have the classic ONS fight over this one. This is a boss that appears multiple times in the game. He appears twice as a boss, once by himself in the early game, and again as a duo with another Dragonrider in the mid game. Honestly, there's not too much to write home about. He's a more boring version of the Winged Knight from Dark Souls 3. The duo version of the fight has a bit more going on, because the second one is on top of a pillar and shoots arrows at you, and you have to lure him off the pillar to fight him. Still, it's nothing special. They could bring back the Dragonrider duo and have the second one be on top of a pillar, and the players have to do some platforming to attack him, but the boss itself still wouldn't be that interesting. It hits everyone at different times, but he's called the Dragonrider, and we never actually see him riding a dragon. My theory is that they planned for him to ride the Guardian Dragon boss, but couldn't figure out how to get that to work, so they just didn't. Luckily, in Elden Ring they figured out how to do mounted combatants with bosses like the Knight's Cavalry. Maybe they can make Dragonrider to actually ride a dragon. Except if they did that, it would just turn into a worse nameless king fight. Sadly, the Dragonrider's potential is squandered by good old Faram himself, so Dragonrider gets a D tier. He's underwhelming by himself, or even as a duo, and if he lives up to his namesake, he would still fail to size up to another very prominent boss already in the game. The Flexile Sentry is another enemy who primarily appears as a boss but then shows up later as a normal enemy. Dark Souls 2 does this a lot. Anyway, conceptually, Flexile Sentry is somewhat interesting. It has one set of legs but two of everything else, one in front and one in back. One side wields a set of curved swords and the other wields a set of spiked clubs. Together they have a moveset that can hit anyone, regardless of what side of the boss they are on. It has a standard set of attacks, nothing too crazy. It doesn't even have projectiles or anything. What makes the boss fight hard in the original game is that you fight it in a room that slowly fills with water, making it hard to move around the later on in the fight it gets. And that's it. That's all there is to the enemy. If I were from Software, I'd just treat Flexile Sentry like the game does after the boss fight and only have it appear as a normal enemy. Maybe it could show up in a pre-night boss group of enemies with a group of vulgar militia, and it could precede a real night boss like the Ruined Sentinels or the Lost Sinner. I would not give it the actual boss treatment though. Flexile Sentry gets a C tier. There's nothing that can outright do what it does better, but what it does do is nothing special. It would be neat if it were to come back, but it shouldn't do so as a boss. I guess it has the flexibility to be able to work well as a tougher normal enemy. Yet another enemy that shows up first as a boss, but then appears again later as a normal enemy. Ruined Sentinels is actually a trio fight where you originally fight one on a smaller platform and then two right after in a bigger room. If you accidentally fall, it turns into a trio fight, or if you take too long to kill the first one, the other two will jump up to the small platform and the trio fight will happen up there. They have fairly simple moves where they swing their golf clubs around at you, maybe twirling, sometimes throwing their shields at you. I think the beauty of this boss is that it teaches you how to fight multiple enemies at once, but it doesn't throw you into the deep end. You are first forced to spar with a single one in an intimate space so you can really get to know its moveset and dodge opportunities, and then once that one is defeated, you challenge two at a time. Since you already beat one, you now have to learn how to manage positioning so you aren't caught by surprise. Something I have had suggested to me is that if they throw their shields, it should come back to them. In Shadow of the Erdtree, there is a shield that does this, the Smith Script shield. But if From Software is unwilling to use this justification for that, then they should just be able to pick up their shield if they're standing next to it. I think they would be a great fit for Nightreign, but it should be a 3v3 fight from the get-go instead of a 3v1 followed by a 3v2 fight. A tier. I think they would make a really solid Night 1 or Castle Basement boss fight, especially if it's a 3v3 fight. The movesets aren't too complex, nor are they too simple, and they have good options for each kind of character the players can choose from. Before I get into the next boss, this is usually where the Belfry Gargoyle segment would be. However, I have already covered the Belfry Gargoyles in my Dark Souls 1 video, so check that out if you are interested. And now, I will talk about the Lost Sinner is in a weird spot for me. As a whole, I like her boss fight, but I don't think she would be that good in Nightreign. She's another in the boss archetype of dude with sword. But what makes her interesting besides the lore is that her arena is dark, but you can brighten it up prior to entering the fog wall by carrying a flame over to different sconces outside the arena. Doing so will not only make it easier to read her movements, but will also increase the range you can log onto her from. Something else to note is that in New Game Plus she gets 2 additional Pyromancers in her boss fight. If she were to be put in Nightreign, I think she would need those Pyromancers. On her own, she'd be too easy for a group of 3. However, I do not think the additional Pyromancers are enough to place her very high. Oh, and before I forget, she's supposed to be the reincarnation of the Bed of Chaos, or something like that. Luckily, she's not absolute trash like that firebug from Dark Souls 1. Anyway, I'll give her the C tier. I don't think she would stand out in Nightraign's roster, and there's no reasonable way to include the darkness aspect of her fight, which I legitimately believe is super unique and cool. I can't believe this is an actual boss. It's 3 skeletons, and when you kill each one, a few more spawn. That's it. It's got a variety of skeleton types that spawn, but it's not a boss. It's a horde of skeletons with the boss health bar. D tier. Bring back Nito instead of this boss. For the most part, Dark Souls 2 bosses don't rely on their arenas too much, which does add to their viability as Nightreign bosses. The Executioner's Chariot is probably the biggest exception to this. It starts with the players in a donut-shaped hallway with alcoves on the sides. The goal is to travel around the hallway to reach the end while skeletons try and stop you. While that happens, the chariot constantly runs in circles around the donut, hitting everything in its path, including the skeletons. Players can avoid getting hit by hiding in the alcoves in the sides of the hallway like in the heroes' graves in regular Elden Ring. Once players reach the end, they can pull a lever to lower a gate, which causes the chariot to crash and stop running. Now the players have to fight the chariot. It's got kick attacks with its hooves and some dark magic attacks. It's all around very simple, with the high damage and large hitboxes really providing difficulty. Needless to say, Nightreign wouldn't be able to support this boss. That first phase is super memorable, and while an arena like that could theoretically be placed at the end of a new Shifting Earth, there are probably better options for Shifting Earth events. From Software could just put the Phase 2 part in the game, but that would be very underwhelming. The best way to implement this boss would be similar to the Heroes' Graves in regular Elden Ring, if it was added as a Shifting Earth event. The players would descend down the grave while being constantly harassed by the Chariot, and at the end would be the donut hallway like in the original fight. Then it plays out like normal. This would be a cool idea, but I just don't see the Executioner's Chariot serving as an appropriately challenging and impactful Shifting Earth final encounter. I have to put my personal opinions aside about this boss for this ranking. The Executioner's Chariot gets a D tier on the tier list. It is one of the bosses most reliant on its arena, which doesn't fit into Nightreign. The Pinwheel of Dark Souls 2. Covetous Demon is astonishingly easy for the place in the game that he's at. He's also so easy that I'm not even sure I've seen all of the attacks he has. I keep hearing about things he can do, but I've only ever seen him flop around. For example, there are enemies in pots hanging from the ceiling, and if you shoot one down, he supposedly gets distracted trying to attack you and eats the enemy instead, but I've never seen that. There is a slightly tougher version in the Ice DLC, but it's not a boss. Anyway, Covetous Demon gets a C tier. I don't think there's anything quite like it elsewhere in the games, but I don't think it'd be a good fit for Nightreign. Just like how the Dragonrider and the Lost Sinner had mechanics that made the fight easier if the player did some action prior to entering the fog wall, Mytha the Baneful Queen's arena is covered in poison unless you light the windmill's blades on fire. Without doing this, you'll get poisoned in the Dark Souls game with the most lethal poison status effect. To rub salt in the wound, Mytha regenerates health if she stands in poison. People like to meme about how hidden the spot to burn the windmill is, or how nonsensical it is that doing that makes the boss not annoying, and there is merit to that, but for the purposes of this analysis, I like the general concept of doing something outside of the boss to make the fight easier, so I don't personally find this atrocious. That whole aspect probably wouldn't work very well in Nightreign without some dedicated Shifting Earth structure, or a rework to some of the existing enemy camps to include a removing the poison puddles mechanic. The most feasible scenario I could see is a poison swamp Shifting Earth. There is no way to remove the poison, but I'm envisioning something like the Farron Swamp where the players need to find and light 3 fires around the swamp to open a door that leads to the swamp's main boss. Across the swamp are chains of small islands that players can stand in to avoid getting afflicted with the status. Mytha would be a boss found in the swamp, potentially guarding a fire. I think it could be interesting if the players had to pay attention to positioning so she doesn't linger in the poison and heal herself. I believe this idea has merit. Oh, and I didn't even talk about her combat prowess. She's fine. She has sorceries and some melee attacks. She can even throw her head at players. It's nothing spectacular, which is why I like adding an additional element to her fight, that being something to test the player's ability to manipulate her pathfinding and avoid her having an advantage. B tier. As a normal night boss or a field boss, she wouldn't be amazing. However, placing her in a potential poison swamp Shifting Earth could really add a new layer of difficulty to her fight that could be mechanically deep. This is the Ceaseless Discharge boss fight from Dark Souls 1, but better, due to one main reason. He has a bigger variety of attacks. He can shoot lasers from his hands and breathe fire instead of just slamming the arena with his fists. Players also have to worry about positioning because in addition to the walkable area in the arena being small, there is a gaping hole in the floor. If you aren't paying attention, you could just fall into the hole and lose that attempt. There's also another part of the arena around a corner that the old Iron King cannot hit you from, but if you linger, he'll move there to fight you. It's way smaller in area, but also distinctly lacks a hole, so it's cool that the players can use that to avoid some attacks, but also equally cool that they cannot stay there for too long. While I do think this is just a better version of the Ceaseless Discharge fight, its viability for Nightreign is held back by the premise of the fight, that being that it is a large monster that hangs outside of the arena at a lower elevation so that you can see its torso and head. Its attacks have its limbs linger in the arena so you can hit them. It's a good concept, but there's not really a spot in Nightreign that can support this. Perhaps they can stick him at the end of the crater Shifting Earth where the magma worm is, but the old Iron King isn't that big, so he would have a lot of trouble filling up the space that would be given to him by that room. Old Iron King gets a C tier. This Gwyn reincarnation is in the unfortunate position of having a decent fight with decent mechanics that wouldn't be able to be supported in Nightreign. Scorpioness Najka is an okay boss. There's something visually distinct about her having a human body on top of a giant scorpion with 2 tails. This makes her reminiscent of Quelaag from the previous game, but instead of a spider, it's a scorpion. There's also the option to summon another man-scorpion to aid you in the fight, which is pretty cool. She has ranged sorceries, a burn attack, and some physical attacks. She can swipe behind her using your tail and attack in front of her as well. She's big enough where it's easy for all characters to attack her without getting in each other's way. She's also not reliant on an arena, with the only real restriction being that she would need to appear in an area with loose soil to make her burrowing attack plausible. All of this on paper makes her seem like she would be a great fit for Nightreign, and honestly, she could be a really balanced fight. My biggest issue is the hype factor. While there's nothing egregious about her fight, there's a sense of awe and epicness that she lacks. My best comparison would be to the nameless King, which is indeed in Nightreign already. Words can't describe how unbelievably shocked I was to see the trailer live during the 2024 Game Awards. I wasn't expecting anything Elden Ring related, but then, is that the Lands Between? And then moments later, holy shit, that's the Nameless King in Limgrave. What the fuck is this game? Seeing Scorpioness Najka in a trailer wouldn't give me the same feeling. It would be more akin to, oh, neat, she's in this game. I would definitely be more hyped if they added bosses like Burnt Ivory King or the Pursuer to this game. Najka gets a B tier. On paper she would work well and not have any issues of balance, but in terms of memorability and impact, there are better options. It's strange. The Royal Rat Authority has the propensity to be a really annoying boss, but I personally haven't had too many problems with it. You start the fight with a few rats whose attacks do toxic and petrify statuses, and then soon after the main boss joins, which is a giant wolf dog thing. It attacks with paw swipes and the like, and that's really it for the fight. The toxic and petrify from the rats can give players some grief, but once they're defeated, the boss really isn't that hard. The strategy is the same as the one for Sif. Stay under or behind the enemy, and that's it. For Nightreign, I think the format of the Royal Rat Authority boss really fits the pre-Night boss enemy group well, but it could also work as a Night 1 boss if the rats constantly respawn until the main boss dies. That way it could work like the Wormface or Tibia Mariner. I personally think that those two bosses are among the most annoying of the Night 1 bosses, but if From Software asked me to put Royal Rat Authority in the game, this is how I'd do it. C tier. There are situations in which the Royal Rat Authority could work, but it would be annoying, even if it functions similarly to the existing Nightreign bosses. Dark Souls 2 has a couple of these enemy horde bosses, doesn't it? Prowling Magus and Congregation is another punching bag for the Dark Souls 2 community. Unless you're doing one of a really few specific challenge runs, it's really easy. Prowling Magus himself is a cleric type enemy, and his congregation is comprised of some crawling melee attackers and lesser clerics. The best situation I can see them in is as an Evergaol boss. It would fit lore-wise too, since they obviously don't worship the Erdtree. They could be imprisoned for heresy. It seems fitting for the Golden Order's conquest of the Lands Between. B tier. I think I've talked myself into liking this whole Evergaol idea for the Prowling Magus and his congregation. I think if added, it'll be the least annoying of the group Evergaol bosses. I never really thought too much about this boss the first few times I fought the Royal Rat Vanguard. It's a horde of rats. There is a main one with a mohawk that needs to be defeated, but it doesn't appear immediately. It's really straightforward. I think it could be a really funny Evergaol boss. Imagine opening an Evergaol and 20 rats appear. That would be hilarious. It wouldn't be particularly difficult, but it doesn't need to be. Plus, rats are already in the game. They would just need to give one a mohawk. It probably doesn't work lore-wise, but I think the fun factor is enough to make it a good fit. B tier. It'd be a great Evergaol boss, but the Royal Rat Vanguard should not take the place of an actual returning boss. The Rotten is the boss found at the bottom of the pit in Majula, Dark Souls 2's hub. He visually resembles a pile of corpses with arms and a face wielding a sword. He attacks mostly by swinging that sword. He also has some rarer attacks that he'll use occasionally, like a dark explosion attack, a dark projectile attack, or one where he vomits on the ground. If he were to be brought back for Nightreign, I think they should up the frequency of these other attacks since they are more punishing for melee and especially ranged characters. In addition, there's a hidden mechanic where if you deal enough damage to any of his arms, you can cut it off and it'll drop a Ferrous Lockstone, which can open some doors and activate traps. I guess the closest equivalent to this in Nightreign is a Stone Sword Key, so it'd be neat that if they brought back the Rotten, they made the arm drop a Stone Sword Key when severed. I still think the Rotten would be a great deal easier in Nightreign, partially because the Rotten's arena has a few pits of fire that can do damage over time. In Nightreign there won't be any, and the arena will just in general be way larger, so I'm not confident he'll be a tough boss. Not that he's particularly difficult in Dark Souls 2, but you get the idea. I think he'd make a pretty decent Night 1 boss, but I don't really see him as a field boss or a castle boss. B tier. He needs some adapting to end up as a pretty decent boss, around the same difficulty as the Smelter Demon, but I think he'd end up way easier than he deserves to be. The Looking Glass Knight is such a beautiful boss, and that beauty is carried by the arena. It's a metallic knight creature carrying a sword in one hand and a giant mirror in the other as a shield. I just really love the atmosphere the fight happens in. It takes place on the roof of a partially destroyed castle in the middle of a storm. That dark and stormy night just adds so much. It also lends credence to the boss's attacks, which, apart from the standard sword swipes, can have the knight raise his sword upward, as if channeling the storm and imbuing it with lightning. He then strikes it either horizontally at creatures directly in front of him, or slams it down to release 5 lightning bolts that travel across the ground to hit targets far away. It's a really beautiful and aesthetic boss, even if it isn't too difficult. In Nightreign, the player should be able to jump over the ranged lightning attack if he's brought back. In Dark Souls 2, the arena isn't that big, so the attack teaches players to stick relatively close to the knight so they can get behind him when he does the lightning attack. In addition, his shield completely blocks all damage that hits it, meaning he's more vulnerable from the back. In Nightreign, it'd be easier for a group of Nightfarers to have one player keep the knight's aggro so he doesn't constantly spin around, allowing the other 2 players to dish out damage from the back. Oh, and I haven't even mentioned the Phase 2 yet. Well, when the Looking Glass Knight gets low enough in health, he'll stop fighting, hold his shield out, and another enemy will pop out. It's supposed to be another player that the knight summons, but nowadays when the servers aren't seeing as much activity, it usually summons an NPC with a set loadout. Obviously, summoning adversaries isn't something the knight should do in Nightreign, as the game structure is definitely more cooperative than adversarial when it comes to player-to-player interactions. The knight could summon other NPC copies of Nightfarers like how Everdark Libra does, but it still wouldn't have the same oomph that a PvP boss has. The most thematically appropriate spot I could see the Looking Glass Knight working in is as a castle rooftop boss, but I don't think he has the same amount of challenge that the other rooftop bosses have. Perhaps if they made him summon 3 NPC Nightfarers? That just doesn't seem like fun to me though. His difficulty is more appropriate for a castle basement boss or a Night 1 boss, but they don't fit the aesthetic that the Looking Glass Knight benefits so much from. I'm going to give the Looking Glass Knight a B tier. I really love the fight the way that it is in Dark Souls 2, but there is no feasible way to bring it to Nightreign in a way that wouldn't tarnish the fight severely. You don't suppose that's just a regular frog? No. The Demon of Song is far from a regular frog. This gross creature has some interesting gameplay implications. Throughout the level leading up to this boss, there is a song in the air that pacifies some of the enemies. Slaying the demon stops the song, awakening the creatures, so going through the level again has the enemies with their normal aggro range. This mechanic could be really cool if the player had to go through the level again, but sadly that isn't the case. This could be rectified in Nightreign if it is added to a Shifting Earth. Most Shifting Earths have an easy escape from the final boss to the final Night 2 circle, but if the Demon of Song is added, it would be interesting if they had that not be the case where it shows up. Then the players have to go back through the dungeon with the enemies active. They could spend time slowly eliminating the enemies on the way to the demon, but that would waste time and would really only be worth doing if the players needed runes. Battle-wise, the Demon of Song is also interesting. It is covered in a thick skin that makes it impervious to damage, but to attack it must open the mouth so it can stick its arms out of that mouth and attack players with them. Doing so reveals its vulnerable spot, the arms in the interface, which can rarely aid in attacks by spitting water. Besides that, it has an attack where it stands up on its hind legs and falls over onto the player. Due to the nature of this boss, its attacks must cause the boss to leave its mouth open and arms exposed so players can deal damage to it. It's also a different take on a boss mechanic that forces the players to engage it from the front. Drangleic has a hard-to-tell punishing attack that hurts players behind her, Flexile Sentry has no back so you're always in front of it, and the Demon of Song just straight up ignores all damage that isn't from the front. It's neat. Demon of Song gets an A tier. It could work great on its own as a Night 1 or field boss, but it would shine best as part of a Shifting Earth event. However, that would take a considerable amount of work. King Vendrick's right-hand man, Velstadt, the Royal Aegis, is the most standard of the Dark Souls 2 bosses, in my opinion. His quality comes from his simplicity. He's a dude that swings a giant bell around and in phase 2 he gets some dark attacks. It's simple, but it's not easy, because that bell hits like a freight train colliding with a bug floating in the wind. That's us. His attacks are punishing, but it's always obvious when you get hit. My only problem is that he only has one ranged attack. It's one where he casts dark magic to attack the player. He also has a rushdown attack to close distances, but I think he needs maybe one more attack to combat ranged characters. Maybe, since he's the Royal Aegis, he can summon a magic shield that deflects projectiles? I don't know. I just think that he needs like one more thing to deal with the mages and Iron Eye. A tier. He's got a really solid boss fight with a simple yet effective moveset, but needs just a little bit more to deal with ranged characters. He'd be a great field or even castle rooftop boss and could even be a Night 2 boss if defeating him also summons King Vendrick. It's not a bird, it's a dragon. Indeed. Well, anatomically it's more of a wyvern, but that's getting into semantics. The Guardian Dragon is, surprise surprise, another dragon boss. In phase 1 it attacks with mostly physical moves, and in phase 2 it unleashes its fire breath while flying around. I'll make things short. It would probably be a fine boss if brought into Nightreign. It could make a decent lesser field boss or a Night 1 boss, but when I think of all the other Souls dragon bosses, I would rather have almost any other one. Midir would be cool, Sinh would be neat, Calabeat would be great. Guardian Dragon just doesn't stack up to them. It could have been funny if the pre-boss enemy group for the Nameless King was this boss and a Dragonrider, but that ship has sailed. B tier. It could work fine, but there are better alternatives. In my Guardian Dragon video, I said I would rather have almost any other dragon boss instead of it. Well, the almost was included because of this boss. I'd rather have the Guardian Dragon than the Ancient Dragon. Lore-wise, he is actually quite interesting, being the implied product of experimentation by Vendrick's elder brother, Aldia. When killed, the dragon drops a giant soul and dragon bones, meaning the ancient dragon is probably a giant soul in a reanimated dragon's body. It's also the only dragon in the series to talk with the player character, and much like another draconic creature we meet in the previous game, Priscilla, they don't attack us unless we hit them first. One could go on an entire playthrough or even multiple playthroughs without even knowing that he's a boss. I bring this up because the Ancient Dragon is a terrific character, but a terrible boss. There are two main bad things, but since the fight does not have many mechanics, they stick out like a sore thumb. The first detriment is that he has a very limited moveset. He's got a few stomp attacks for each of his legs, a forward fire breath, and the most annoying one of all, one where he flies up into the air and breathes fire down onto the arena. That's it. No phase 2, no status effects, not even a grab attack. The other horrible aspect of his fight is that he has, in my opinion, the worst hitboxes of any Dark Souls 2 boss. They're large, lingering, and often deal so much knockback it'll combo into the next part of the attack, and he does enough damage to often two-shot you. So what'll often happen is that you stand somewhere you think is safe, get hit by an attack that should not have hit you, get knocked down with some health remaining, and then, as you're getting back up, you get hit again and die. The worst offender of this is the Flying Fire Breath attack. Its hitbox is way too big and lasts long enough where if you get hit by the initial attack and survive, the fire still rains down when you get back up, resulting in you getting hit a second time. And if you're far enough away to only get hit once, there's a decent chance the dragon will just land on you, ending your attempt anyway. And it's not like the Ancient Dragon can be fixed by just touching up the hitboxes either, because then you're left with a bland boss with a few attacks. Ancient Dragon goes down as the dragon boss I want the least in Nightreign. D tier. Bring back literally any other dragon fight over this one. I really hope my deep affection for this boss isn't clouding my judgment. The Darklurker is a boss whose very existence is a mystery. It's an optional hidden boss, the most difficult to find in the base game. You need to find 3 spots where you can fall down into a hole where an old man is, and if you enter his covenant, he can open a portal to let you into a short area. In there, you need to fight NPC enemies and witches, light a fire, and once that is done in all 3 locations, exiting the last one will put you in the Darklurker arena. For a boss that's so obscure and hidden to find, you'd expect it to have a ton of lore, but nope. The Darklurker has vague hints of lore, possibly linking it to Magus or the 4 Kings, but there really isn't much. The Darklurker is a 4-armed angel that attacks with spells. It has a laser beam, a sun that shoots fireballs at you, a magical dart, a portal that can teleport a dark bomb, a get-off-me explosion, and a magenta laser sword that it can conjure from its hands. It's got melee options, it's got range options, and to spice things up, at around half health, it splits into 2 identical copies, each with their own distinct attack patterns. Much like the Ruined Sentinels, the first phase involves the player getting comfortable with the moveset of 1 copy, and phase 2 involves using that knowledge to fight 2 copies. The main mechanical difference between the Ruined Sentinels and the Darklurker is that the Darklurker has a more complicated moveset that adapts to the player's playstyle. This bodes well for the Darklurker's chances of being a good boss if put into Nightreign. And another amazing thing about this boss is its visual presentation. It's in a medium-sized cavern that's nearly completely dark, so the light blue coloring of its body and the bright outlines of its ranged spells stand out. While the darkness helps, I don't think it's a vital part of the fight, unlike the 4 Kings. It's more like the darkness in Magus' fight, where it mainly enhances the visual atmosphere of the battle. Darklurker would be fantastic in Nightreign. I don't think it should be a field boss because it's not a creature that seems like it would be found roaming the land. It's a hidden, mysterious boss that should either be sought out or attracted to combat, not stumbled upon. Because of that, I think it would work best as a night boss, but whether it should be a night 1 or night 2 boss, I'm not sure. I think as it sits, the difficulty is too high for night 1, but too low for night 2. It's possible that the 3-player groups would be just enough to offset the difficulty for a night 1 encounter, but it would need playtesting to get the balance right, and my problem is that being a night 1 boss feels kinda lame for Darklurker, seeing as how it's an endgame boss, or very nearly. Night 2 feels more appropriate for a boss of Darklurker's caliber, but it would need to split into 3 or something like that to be the right difficulty for a night 2 boss. Either way, I really want Darklurker to return to Nightreign. In my DS1 videos, S tiers were awarded to bosses that could be ported with minimal changes and would fit right into Nightreign. I think Darklurker does fit that criteria, but only if it becomes a Night 1 boss. To be a sufficient Night 2 boss, tweaks are needed. I still think Darklurker is worthy of an S tier though. What is it with Abyss-related Dark Souls bosses being great fits for Nightreign? I don't know. All I know is that the Darklurker should be top of the list of bosses to add to Nightreign, if From Software is considering doing so in the upcoming DLC. King Vendrick in Dark Souls 2 lore feels like Gwyn in Dark Souls 1 lore. From the war against the giants, to the search for the cure for hollowing, Vendrick's at the center of it all. And much like how we find Gwyn all hollowed at the kiln of the First Flame, we find King Vendrick in the Undead Crypt, mindlessly walking in circles. He's not even wearing clothes. Dark Souls 1 spends the entire story telling us about Gwyn's existence, so when we finally see him, and more importantly the state that he is in, we are left wondering if his mission was worth it. Dark Souls 2 takes a different approach. Vendrick is not the final boss. He's not even a required boss. In fact, he's not even an aggressive boss. He does not attack you until you hit him a few times. Vendrick is the main character of the lore, but his placement as an optional passive boss really makes you wonder if something else is up. When Gwyn was reduced down to his gut reactions, he still wanted to fight us on sight. Vendrick isn't the same. We can even enter his memory, and through the DLC we find out that he's a sympathetic character. He was driven crazy trying to find the cure for the undead curse, but perhaps there was someone who manipulated him behind the scenes, someone who can be blamed for all the problems that Vendrick caused. As a fight, Vendrick doesn't have any unique mechanics apart from the one that reduces his defenses if you collect giant souls before fighting him. In the battle itself, Vendrick attacks by carelessly swinging his sword around. He drags it around, only truly lifting it up to do an overhead slam. He can rarely cast a pyromancy, but even does so mindlessly. His attacks are slow and simple, but he hits very hard. This is a man that once had a lot of power, but now is reduced to a shadow of his former self. He'd be okay in Nightreign, combat-wise. Probably better than Gwyn. He's a bigger target with attacks that hit at a bigger range, so he'd be more of a threat to the mages and archer. It's just that he's a lore-centric character, and I don't see the knight swallowing him up, then transporting him to Linveld. His whole theme is corruption, and while the knight corrupts, it also augments. Having Vendrick be corrupted by the knight, possibly upgrading him, feels like the wrong thing to do for Vendrick's character. Vendrick gets a C tier. He's more suitable than Gwyn combat-wise, but he's a lore-heavy character who would be tainted if added to Nightreign. Throne Watcher and Throne Defender are mechanically Dark Souls 2's take on Ornstein and Smo from Dark Souls 1. The Throne Defender is slow and bulky, whereas the Throne Watcher is fast and nimble. At half health, they imbue their weapons with electricity. When one gets downed, they kneel for a while before getting revived by the other, meaning you have to down both within a certain amount of time from each other. Unlike ONS, the fight ends when they both get downed. In addition, there are no pillars. With no way to block either enemy, the fight feels less refined. With ONS, you can focus on one, and once he's down, the other will get powered up. With the Watcher and Defender, you must constantly switch focus back and forth because you need to deplete both their health bars around the same time as each other. It's an interesting idea, but it needs some way of separating the two. That's where multiplayer comes in. Nightreign being balanced around 3-player groups means you can expect that there will always be someone to distract either the Watcher or Defender. The only issue then will come from placement. A pair can fit fairly well into the castle basement or rooftop. They could make a decent Knight 1 boss as well. Normally they should appear in places with built structures, which rules them out as a field boss, but if they were displaced from their normal posts by the Knight, it could lend credence to there being a Knight boss. B tier. There are ways they could work well, but they are a bit more chaotic compared to Ornstein and Smo, and I think most fans would rather see them port to ONS than these two. In the King Vendrick video, I hinted that someone may have manipulated him into causing all the problems that he did. That gets revealed after the Throne Watcher and Defender are defeated, when a skeletal lady walks out of the fog gate, thanks us for helping her, and then proceeds to fight us. This is Queen Nashandra, Vendrick's wife and the final boss of Dark Souls 2. We actually talked to her, or maybe a projection of her, early in the story, the first time we visit Drangleic Castle, but she appeared way more human back then. Now her true form is revealed. She is the source of all the strife in King Vendrick's life. She is the one that urged him to wage war on the giants and caused him to go crazy trying to find the cure for the undead curse. She also appears to be one of the daughters of Manus, the final boss of Dark Souls 1's DLC. For all this build-up, I actually find that Nashandra is a bit of a letdown in a boss fight. You can summon 4 orbs that reduces your max health if you stay near them too long, but they can be easily destroyed with an attack. She has some ranged spells and a get off me explosion, but mostly attacks with her scythe. She in theory has variety, but she still somehow lacks difficulty. She could make a decent Knight 1 boss mechanically, but she's the freaking final boss of Dark Souls 2. She should not be just a Knight 1 boss. Queen Nashandra gets a B tier. She would fit best as a Knight 1 fight mechanically, but anything short of a Knight 2 fight would be a disappointment due to who she is in Dark Souls 2. Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin, is a technically optional boss that can become the true final boss of Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, provided you have done some prior steps to beating Nashandra. He is Vendrick's elder brother and has spent most of his life researching life, death, and undeath. His keep is full of caged monsters and he has experimented on many of them. He has committed many atrocities in the name of science, but interestingly enough, he is the most philosophical of all the characters in Dark Souls. Period. He's also known for some banger quotes, like, "No matter how tender, how exquisite, a lie will remain a lie." It is for this reason that Aldia is such a cool character, but not really a cool fight. As an immobile tree stump, he attacks with almost purely projectiles. He can cause roots to spring up under your feet or throw fire projectiles at you. He also explodes when he teleports around the arena. The most frustrating part of his fight is the ever-present flame aura that does constant damage to you if you're standing close to him, like Smelter Demon in later phases. In phase 2, that flame aura does even more damage. He dissipates the aura to charge up for attacks, leaving some openings, but honestly, it's just annoying. It also makes ranged characters have a way easier time with the fight than melee characters. He's a unique boss with unique patterns, but is held back by the annoying flame aura. If they toned down the damage to be a minor inconvenience, Aldia would be a way more enjoyable fight and could make an alright field or night boss. I think I'd rather have a different boss though. The titular character for Dark Souls 2's re-release gets a C tier from me. He could be okay, especially if his most annoying mechanic is toned down, but he's also nothing special, fight-wise. Out of every single boss I've covered so far, Elana the Squalid Queen has given me the most confusion. She's the first boss of the Crown of the Sunken King DLC for Dark Souls 2. She's also another fragment of Manus' soul, similar to how Nashandra is. While Nashandra embodies want, Elana embodies wrath. She also shows the player what would have happened to Drangleic if we didn't defeat Nashandra, because the Sunken King, whom Elana was married to, is no longer around, and his kingdom and the kingdom before it is in ruins. In combat, she uses a variety of spells and also swings her staff around, but her most unique mechanic is that she summons other creatures, including a horde of skeletons and Velstadt. He's limited to his phase 1 moveset and looks more gold, so it isn't the actual Velstadt, but it is strange that she does this despite having no apparent relation to him. She can also summon pigs, but that is rare enough to probably just be an Easter egg. My issues come from this. She's most likely to summon Velstadt, but when she does, he takes the spotlight. It feels like the boss fight is against Elana and Velstadt rather than Elana and her summons. At that point, I'd rather just fight Velstadt alone, as I much prefer that fight. I can envision a solution, but I don't feel confident about it, so here it is. Make it a duo fight where both Elana and Velstadt start together, and defeating both is required. Give Velstadt his entire fight too. The problem arises that Elana now really would only summon skeletons, so I say, give her a few other things she can summon. It should still be creatures associated with filth, as she is the Squalid Queen, or Wrath, as she's an embodiment of Wrath. She could summon in Deathbite crabs, slugs, worm faces, nomadic merchants, and mad pumpkin heads. Putrid corpses, clean rot knights, slimes, and the giant ants could work too. She shouldn't summon in anything that would make her not seem like the primary boss, so no ulcerated tree spirits or the giant worm faces, just smaller ones that provide a distraction without stealing the spotlight. And then the pair would make a decent Night 2 boss. Would this work? Probably. The only issue now is that the only thing linking Elana and Velstadt is that she can summon him. They aren't lovers, family, close friends, anything like that. They showed up together because they showed up together. I'd like to think From Software cares more about lore consistency nowadays, so should Elana show up with Velstadt now? I don't know. Elana the Squalid Queen gets a C tier. She needs a lot of tweaking to make her work in Nightreign, but even then, I'd rather just have Velstadt alone. Sinh the Slumbering Dragon is the final boss of the Crown of the Sunken King DLC for Dark Souls 2. He was worshipped by the kingdom that the Sunken King took over, which was built to protect him. When that happened, his Drakeblood Knights tried to kill the dragon, and they were probably manipulated by Elana to do so. Ultimately, they failed, and Sinh still flies around, torching the kingdom's denizens. After we defeat Elana, we are granted access to the centermost room in the Sanctum City, where Sinh resides, and we can challenge him there. In combat, Sinh uses paw swipes and head bashes. He also has a few fire breath attacks, which also does toxic buildup. Some fire attacks can even leave behind a cloud of poison that lingers for a while. That's probably the most unique aspect of Sinh, the fact that he does both fire and toxic. My main issue is that Sinh really likes to overuse his flying attacks. Granted, he has a couple of flying attacks, so it doesn't get stale, but it does get annoying as it results in a lot of the battle being spent chasing after him. If they reduce the frequency of his flying attacks, I think he could be a great fit for Nightreign. He has a good variety of attacks, a unique damage gimmick, and a good size for a multiplayer game. Even his attack speed seems pretty good, as he hits far more frequently than other Dark Souls 2 bosses. Sinh the Slumbering Dragon gets an A tier. He needs the frequency of his flying attacks to be reduced, but if that happens, he could make a great boss that could fit almost anywhere. Field, castle rooftop, or end of night. The Afflicted Graverobber, Ancient Soldier Varg, and Sarah the Old Explorer, more colloquially known as the Gank boss, is an optional boss in the Crown of the Sunken King DLC for Dark Souls 2. Every DLC has an optional boss that's balanced around multiplayer, and this is the first DLC's example. It's a trio fight against 3 NPCs that each have a boss health bar. The Afflicted Graverobber wields a katana and is the DPS of the typical RPG team. Ancient Soldier Varg uses the full Havel Knight gear and represents the tank, and Sarah uses a great bow and thrusting sword to provide support to the other two. Not much lore is given for the trio, but their names imply that they are exploring and looting an ancient city you find them in. I don't think I need to elaborate on their combat prowess, since it's the same as any player that uses the same gear. What I will talk about is the arena, since that's probably the most interesting part of the fight. It's in a cavern with 2 main parts, an upper part and a lower part, with ramps connecting the two in a couple of spots. Ideally, having 2 separate layers supports the player's ability to separate the trio from each other, but the aggression of both the Afflicted Graverobber and Varg means that you're only likely to separate them from Sarah, who will opt to stay at a distance and pepper you with great arrows. This boss is straight up miserable solo. There will probably be a couple of contrarians commenting otherwise, like there was in my Bed of Chaos video, but I promise they're a loud minority. Even having 1 extra person makes this boss 10 times more enjoyable, and that's because it's a 3-on-1 fight with no measures taken to have the fight be balanced around solo play. As I stated at the beginning of the video, it's balanced around multiplayer, meaning it's most enjoyable in multiplayer. Other multi-enemy boss fights include mechanics that make it bearable in solo play, like the Demon Prince from Dark Souls 3 switching aggressive and passive states, or Ornstein and Smoke from Dark Souls 1 making it easy to separate the two. Prior to typing the script, I had given a bit of thought to this boss, and I think my judgment is going to sound eerily similar to my judgment for Scorpioness Najka. In theory, it could be a balanced fight. There are 3 of them, and in Nightreign there will be 3 of us, and that already puts both the players and the boss on even footing. Given that most teams consist of a DPS tank and support means that it would actually be some sort of a team-based fight, and I actually like the idea of that. But just like Najka, it would suffer from the lack of hype. Yes, it could be balanced, but how disappointed would you be if they brought back a trio NPC fight instead of one of the other boss fights from Dark Souls 2? Like if instead of bringing back Sir Elana or Darklurker, they brought back this trio, it would be disappointing, right? The best scenario they could work in would be as Night Invader, to be completely honest. They wouldn't have boss health bars and would just be NPC invaders. They could even drop their weapons when defeated. That's probably the best way to do it in my head. Ideally, they'd have a random chance of invading a shifting earth event, particularly the ones with established architecture like Noclateo or the Crater, or if other shifting earth events are added, they could invade those. They should also, most importantly, not take the place of an actual returning boss. That's all I ask for. The Gank boss gets a B tier from me. On paper they could be a balanced fight, but I'm pretty sure 99% of people would rather have some other boss over this one, and it should not take the place of one. A lot of Velstadt's lore that does not have to deal with Vendrick has to deal with another character whom we finally get to meet in the DLC, Raimi, or as the boss is called, Fume Knight. He and Velstadt used to be the best of friends, both loyal servants to King Vendrick, but then they got into an argument, one of those arguments that probably involved a ton of yelling and cursing and death threats. Eventually, Vendrick declared Raimi a traitor to Drangleic and he left for Broom Tower, where we find him. It's also a neat touch that if you wear Velstadt's helmet before entering the arena, he'll immediately enter second phase, as if instantly angry at the thought of seeing his former friend and rival. In combat, Fume Knight is one of those bosses that hits slowly, but hits hard. He's got 2 swords, one normal sized and one that is bigger than the Chosen Undead. The normal sword is used in normal combos and attacks faster but doesn't hit as hard, but when he swings his ultra greatsword around, anyone unfortunate to get smacked by it will sustain multiple brain injuries and bodily wounds. He's got a decent number of attacks in phase 1 that all involve swinging either his big sword or both of his swords around. Once he sustains enough damage, he powers up his big sword, making it do even more damage. He also gains a few more attacks, including one where he slowly swings his sword around in a wide arc, dealing a ton of damage to anyone that gets hit, or one where he plunges his sword into the ground, causing many fire orbs to spiral outward from him. It probably isn't a surprise that Velstadt's former friend, Fume Knight, will get a very similar rating to Velstadt himself. They share many similar qualities too. They both carry a giant weapon that does incredible amounts of damage, and have a phase 2 where they buff their weapon with elemental damage and gain a few other attacks that involve that element. And much like Velstadt, Fume Knight also shares my criticism that if he were to be brought to Nightreign, he would also need one more attack that can deal with ranged characters. He can currently do that fire orb attack and a lunging sword strike, but that's it. Maybe he can throw a fireball or summon a flame pillar under the player's feet. something extra to deal with those that stay at safe distances. If he is granted that, he can make an excellent knight or castle rooftop boss. Someone suggested previously that Fume Knight could show up with Velstadt, and while I think that could be cool to see, I do think that each of them can stand on their own. Together they might have just a bit too much going on, even for a 3-person team, so I personally would not want them to fight together. Also, they would probably tear each other's throats out before ours. Fume Knight gets an A tier. He's got a really solid fight with simple but punishing mechanics, but much like his friend Velstadt, he needs something a little more to deal with ranged characters. Coming from a faraway land, Sir Elana served under the Iron King's rule and did so much for his kingdom. Much of the Iron Keep is patrolled by Elana Knights, who appear to have learned some battle techniques from Sir Elana himself, in addition to wielding weapons like his. Eventually he left the Iron King and his kingdom, leaving behind his armor, which still sits at Broom Tower. It is there that we, through the same method we use to enter giant memories, can enter the memory of the old Iron King through the armor and challenge Sir Elana to a fight, which takes place in a large room with polished marble checkered floors and a sunset out the window. In combat, Sir Elana has a ton of attacks, but the one he'll use most often is a dashing slash attack. If he's too close to a player, he'll jump very far back before doing so. He can also do a stab instead of an upward slash, which he can weave into other combos. He has typical katana slashing combos, a jumping slam, and can even enter a stance and parry anyone that attacks him, following it up with a riposte if it works. The most dangerous move is the grab, where he'll engulf his sword with magic and stab it forward. It'll grab anyone it hits, powering up Sir Elana's attacks for a short while. Lastly, he can rarely attack using a magic projectile similar to the Darkmoon Greatsword. Other than that, the fight is about learning when to dodge, as much like other difficult Souls fights, dodging at the wrong time will result in the player getting hit. And unlike other bosses that spend the whole fight moving, since Sir Elana only dashes away from players to dash back toward them with an attack, the whole fight isn't spent chasing him around the arena. He comes to you. You don't need to come to him. When it comes to his compatibility for Nightreign, I don't think it's surprising that I'll rank him highly. His affinity for his dashing slash attack results in him quickly closing any distance players try to create, eliminating his need for range attacks. His grab attack prevents characters like Guardian or Executor from easily tanking the fight, as they'll have to dodge that attack too. I don't think Sir Elana needs many changes, to be completely honest. He could work great as a Castle Rooftop boss or as a Knight 2 boss. I was apprehensive about him being a Knight 2 boss, but Dancer of the Boreal Valley and the Nameless King show that simply having enough speed and aggression can provide an adequate amount of challenge. And in terms of lore, it's possible that after Sir Elana left the Iron King and his kingdom, he got swallowed up by the Knight while on his travels and brought to Limveld. Sir Elana goes above and beyond by simply being a speedy, aggressive boss with a good variety of attacks. He doesn't need invader potential like the Pursuer or tricky battle gimmicks like Darklurker to fit in well. His combat style just really lends well to Nightreign structure. He's the most deserving S tier out of all the Dark Souls 2 bosses, in my opinion. At the very least, make him into an Executor skin, please. One last note, there's a hidden death animation if you defeat him damageless, where he performs seppuku, and I think that should be preserved. Anyway, well done, Sir Elana. Ava the King's Pet is the first boss of the Crown of the Ivory King DLC for Dark Souls 2. He's a Snowbite Tiger with all the attacks you'd expect a tiger to have: paw swipes, pounces, bites, etc. He also has a ranged attack where he summons 5 magic crystals above his head that fire themselves at the player in regular intervals, and a Get Off Me explosion. On his own, he's a solid boss fight with decent tells and a good speed for the game he's in. The cool part is that you can challenge him to a fight as soon as you enter the DLC, but he's completely invisible, unless you go through the level and collect an item that turns invisible enemies visible. It's really neat that you're presented with a boss at the start of the level with a mechanic that makes it almost impossible, and the game basically tells you to go engage with the level design to make it possible. It's a good motivation for exploration. Unfortunately, there's no good way to bring his invisibility mechanic to a Nightreign, unless he comes with a Shifting Earth event. Imagine if From Software made a condensed version of Elliot Lois, the level where Ava is found, and on the way to the end you're stalked by an invisible magic tiger the whole time. Once you get to the end, you find a mechanic that makes it visible, and you finally get to fight the thing that has been harassing you the whole time. I think that sounds epic. Unfortunately though, I think porting Ava as just a random field boss or a night boss wouldn't do him justice. Unless Ledenzalen is an optional boss in the same DLC and exists as a duo fight that is basically 2 Avas. They are darker in appearance and have some dark magic too. The unique mechanic they have that separates them from just a duo Ava fight is that when they get low enough in health, one can heal the other. It's annoying solo, but multiplayer makes the fight more manageable, which is not surprising as Ledenzalen are this DLC's optional boss that is balanced around multiplayer. I think Ledenzalen could make excellent night or field bosses, and if you disagree, you're probably scarred by the level they are found in. And I get it, I hate it too. The thing about Nightreign is, we don't have to deal with that bullshit. I think on their own, Lud and Zelin aren't offensive bosses, but since you have to trudge through that snowfield to challenge them every time in Dark Souls 2, their ratings suffer. It's not actually because the bosses themselves are bad. Ava gets a B tier because he would really only work best in a dedicated Shifting Earth, but without the invisibility gimmick, he would not be as enjoyable as Lud and Zelin, which gets an A tier because its format works better for Nightreign. Going along with the theme of corruption, the Burnt Ivory King used to be a compassionate leader who took in a woman named Elana and nurtured and cared for her. She loved him so much that when he left to deal with the growing expanse of chaos beneath his kingdom, she stayed back and warned people not to come closer so they would not follow in his footsteps. Eventually, he and his knights got corrupted by the chaos, leaving us and a couple of knights still loyal to his original cause that we can recruit to go in and challenge the Ivory King to a fight. And can I just say that this fight is without a doubt the most epic fight in all of Dark Souls 2, in my opinion. After you've explored Lam Lois a second time to recruit Lois Knights, you head to the throne of the Ivory King where you can fall down with them into the arena. After spending so much time in the cold and the white, the flash of red is intense. The cold up top was purposefully summoned to prevent the chaos from spreading. You land on a platform suspended above a pit of lava with 3 portals on its edge and a part jutting out with a 4th massive portal on the far side. An all-out war begins, and your army has to fight other charred Lois Knights that keep coming out of the smaller portals. One by one, the friendly Lois Knights sacrifice themselves to seal up the portals. When the final smaller portal is about to get sealed, the man himself, the Burnt Ivory King, will emerge from the massive portal and the boss fight can start for real. He attacks with his greatsword. Deal enough damage with him and he will turn his sword into a fucking lightsaber, increasing its range at least 3 times and damage by some other amount. He also gains some attacks like the one where he stabs his sword into the ground and a bunch of ice crystals burst out to impale anyone nearby. We all joke about how the bell-bearing hunter is Darth Vader. Well, here is Obi-Wan Kenobi. I seriously adore this fight. This is the Dark Souls 2 devs really showing that they know how to make a fight feel cool. Which is why it brings me no joy to say that I don't think there is any good way to bring the Burnt Ivory King into Elden Ring Nightreign without some serious work. The most feasible way would be to have him be a Knight 2 boss and the group of enemies before him are his charred Lois Knights, but that just wouldn't be the same. He doesn't rely on his arena to make his mechanics work, but he sure as hell relies on his arena to make his fight feel cool. Fighting him on a grassy plain on a random hill would be a serious letdown, which is why I would much prefer that he be the final encounter of a Shifting Earth event. I touched on this slightly in the Ava video, but From Software could make a condensed version of Lam Lois where you are running to the Eye of the Priestess item to make Ava visible, all the while Ava chases you through the place. Once the Eye is obtained and Ava is defeated, the place partially melts and different paths are unlocked to allow players to collect Lois Knights, which are each guarded by a mini-boss. Once the players have collected as many Lois Knights as they would like, they can jump down to a pit in the middle of the Shifting Earth to enter a recreation of the Burnt Ivory King's arena where the fight happens as it does in Dark Souls 2. The players can enter the pit anytime they want after beating Ava, but collecting the Lois Knights can make the Burnt Ivory King fight easier in addition to all the rewards the players will get for beating the mini-bosses guarding the Lois Knights. The reward for completing the Shifting Earth event could maybe be a consumable that creates a portal that summons a friendly Lois Knight once a minute. I think that could be neat. This Shifting Earth idea sounds so cool to me that I'm going to give the Burnt Ivory King an A tier. Having him just be a generic boss would probably grant him a B tier ranking, but he really has a ton of potential if they go the extra mile into making this fight extra epic, and that includes all the build-up that goes into his fight from Dark Souls 2. Duxia Freya is one of the 3 bosses from Dark Souls 2 that was brought into Elden Ring Nightreign. She can appear as a Night 1 boss in the Gaping Jaw, Equilibrious Beast, Fissure in the Fog, and the Night Aspect Expeditions. In Dark Souls 2, she served as a guardian of one of the 4 Lord Souls, that being Seath the Scaleless. She's a giant spider with a face on both sides. In the fight, she has a couple of attacks, including stomps, bites, a laser beam, and acid or webs that she spits from her mouth. She can also swing her body into her opponents and leap into the air to try and crush players with her body. One additional aspect of her fight is that other smaller spiders will constantly spawn in, also harassing any players. She's only vulnerable at her head, meaning you have to be right in front of either face to do damage. Do enough damage to one head and it'll fall off, forcing players to attack the opposite side. For the most part, she is the same in Nightreign as in Dark Souls 2 with a couple of notable exceptions. The first is that they reduce the frequency of her acid spit and increase the frequency of her web spit. This is fine as the acid was supposed to do durability damage, but durability isn't a mechanic in Elden Ring Nightreign. Web spit is probably more dangerous anyway as it slows all movement and forces all rolls to be the equivalent of a fat roll in Elden Ring. The second change is that in Dark Souls 2, Squalid the First Sin holding a torch would scare off the small spiders, meaning you only had to deal with Freya herself and none of her children. In Nightreign, they reverted it back to how it was in regular Dark Souls 2, where holding a torch does nothing. I actually dislike this change, as torches are actively useless apart from their passives in Nightreign, so it would give more reason to maybe hold onto a torch. It's like how I hold onto a seal with a healing spell in case Royal Revenant is the Night 1 boss. The torch could be in the offhand and it will cause players to have to gauge whether it is more important to scare away the spiders or swap to something else in their offhand. If there's one thing I want them to change about Freya the way it's implemented, it is this. The small spiders are so annoying. Other than that, she gets a new attack where when she gets low on health, she'll cover the entire arena in webs, forcing everyone to be webbed for a short while. As a whole, I'm happy they brought back Freya. She probably wouldn't have been my first choice of boss to return from Dark Souls 2, but she's one of the more visually unique bosses from the Dark Souls series. Arachnophobes probably don't feel the same, so maybe there should be some sort of arachnophobia setting to make them not as scary for someone who has legitimate phobia of spiders. I guess I never really thought too much of Freya before Nightreign. I do actively dislike that they removed her children's interactions with the torch, and I wish they would patch the game to make that become a thing again. As she stands, her implementation is slightly annoying. Her spiders are too in the way, and it feels harder to hit her face. Her spiders also constantly spit webs everywhere and attempt to grab the Nightfarers, and they often hide out just outside the camera before making their attack, so sometimes you just get hit out of nowhere. I really feel like adding the torch interaction would seriously make her feel better to fight. Yeah, you don't get a torch everyone, but you've probably opted not to take many because they are so useless unless they have a good passive. This would really add more decision making to the weapon choices and give a way to make the Freya fight more manageable. Again, it's not the choice that I have an issue with, it's the implementation. Duke's Dear Freya gets a B tier for how well it works in Nightreign. There are a few too many aspects to the fight that make it annoying, but there's a clear solution in Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin that could really remedy the fight if it was added back into the game. There are two Smelter Demons in Dark Souls 2, fought at different points in the story. The first time is fairly early on in the Iron Keep prior to fighting the Old Iron King. The second time is as an optional multiplayer balanced boss in the Crown of the Ivory King DLC. There are minor differences between the two versions. The one in the Iron Keep glows orange and deals fire damage, while the one in the DLC is blue and deals a magic damage. The blue one also attacks faster, which makes sense as it's supposed to be harder. When the demon powers up its sword, the magic version gets a larger range than the fire one. They mostly have the same attacks, which all involve that sword. Its most common combo is one where it slashes its sword 3 times, and then on the 3rd time it jumps into the air to follow it up with a stab downward. If there are players nearby, it'll follow it up with one more explosion, which teaches players to not get too greedy. You have to let it finish the combo before attacking. Perhaps the most annoying aspect of both fights is that it'll power itself up multiple times and do progressively more proximity-based damage over time. Unlike Aldia, however, the damage is much more manageable. In Nightreign, they tried to bridge the gap between the two versions of the Smelter Demon. They made it attack about the same speed as the blue one, but the Nightfarers in general are a lot faster than the Chosen Undead, so its speed doesn't feel as different to the players. The biggest changes that they had is start out as the regular Smelter Demon, but when it charges itself up the second time, it starts emitting purple flames, and if it charges it up again, it'll turn completely blue. Breaking this stance will reset it back to red, so the goal is to not let it get supercharged. Other than that, the fight is pretty much the same as it was in Dark Souls 2. The arena obviously is larger in Nightreign, so they gave its flame projectile a range increase, but that's to be expected. I think in terms of what boss from Dark Souls 2 to pick, Smelter Demon is a decent choice in terms of difficulty, and the way they merged the two versions of the Smelter Demon mechanically was a good way to go about it. The only problem is, it's another dude with sword boss. Granted, it is the only returning dude with a sword boss from all the 3 Dark Souls games, I don't count Dancer, so it's not egregious. I still think Darklurker would have been a cooler pick. Smelter Demon gets an A tier. I think they managed to adapt it really well for Nightreign, combining the various aspects of the 2 Smelter Demons into one creature that will transition from red to blue unless you're aggressive enough. Would I have preferred other bosses? Sure, but Smelter Demon always felt like a boss that was never really unfair to me. It has solid talents and hitboxes that aren't too bad given the game that it's from. It's got one semi-annoying mechanic, but it's more of a nuisance than a deal breaker. That's a good fit. Thanks for watching. Dark Souls 3 shorts will come out eventually, but since it's due to come out after the DLC releases, I imagine it'll be heavily affected by that, since at the time of making this video, Dancer and the Nameless King are the only returning bosses from that game. If I were to make a prediction as to which, if any, from Dark Souls 3 bosses will return, I'll predict the Abyss Watchers. It's my last chance, so here's my justification. Phase 1 would make a great multiplayer fight with multiple enemies, and Phase 2 has a lot of wide-reaching slashes and fast movement attacks that the Lone Watcher can use to keep up with ranged characters. Plus, it's the right difficulty for a Night 1 boss, which Dark Souls 3 has no current representation in. It could also be cool in the lore if the reason the Abyss Watchers show up is that they confused the Abyss with the Knight and started chasing after the Knight, and it threw us at it in defense. With that out of the way, I'll see you in the next video, or for the Dark Souls 3 bosses in Nightreign shorts.